this webinar today is all about exotic leaf miners. It's an update on a Hort Innovation funded research project for control, eradication and preparedness for vegetable leaf miner.
So today I'm going to answer a few key questions, and following directly from some of Maddie's last slides there, what will the economic impact be to different commodities in terms of reported crop losses? Just because they can impact your crop doesn't mean they necessarily will be a problem if they can't establish in your area. So where is this pest most likely to establish? But of course, just because it can establish there doesn't mean it will. It needs to get there. And so we're going to look at spread processes as well to see if your particular region and industry is at high risk. So starting off with economic impacts, what we did here is we reviewed the literature to see what was typically reported overseas for a range of different commodities. I guess the very first thing to point out is that data is incredibly patchy. Just because there is a blank in this table doesn't mean that there is no reported impacts here. Then the second thing is that some of these particular commodities, these impact levels represent poor management. So as Maddie already touched on, with poor insecticide usage, it's really important that we get that right so that we don't see these high levels of impacts, which were averaged across all the reported crop losses. But you can see it sort of ranges from about 10% up to total crop loss in some extreme situations. So here quickly you can see also that a lot of these only rely on one source. So just important to take with a grain of salt, but I think it's good to give us an idea of what kind of losses are being seen and are reported in the literature. So we're moving on to, can a pest establish in your particular area? Well, for the rest of the talk, I'm going to be focusing on the vegetable leaf miner, which is the yellow fly on the right. And to do that, we're going to first have to make some assumptions about what are the drivers of population growth. So population growth to a large extent is determined by the actual environmental conditions. So temperature has an important role in how fast populations can grow of this pest. But we also know that temperatures can be too extreme. So we can have extreme temperatures causing population die-off, cold temperatures causing die-off, desiccation through dry conditions, and so on. So we understand that there's this biological interaction with the pest and its climate. So those are the assumptions that we make. Of course, we need some data input. So we need some biological information on how this pest actually responds to different climatic parameters. And of course, we need some climatic data as well. And we put that all together, and that allows us to make a prediction for where this pest is most likely to see high rates of population growth and for Australia. So firstly, if we take an international perspective, we can somewhat validate our predictions by observing where is this pest found overseas, which is represented by these black dots. And we see that by and large, it's capturing the international distribution. But there are a few noteworthy points here. So in some of these drier regions in the United States, we note that on these marginal areas, irrigated crops are often associated with outbreaks of leaf miner flies. Likewise, in these very cold regions in China, in northern China, we can see that greenhouses can actually modulate the microclimatic temperature, which allows for other breakouts occurring in greenhouse scenarios. So while we have climatic factors playing a role, these can be modulated by human management factors. So if we zoom into Australia, what do we find? If we plot the number of suitable months per year for this particular pest, we see that the highest suitability occurs in the northeastern coastal regions, which are expected to support positive population growth rates throughout the entire year. While northern Australia is suitable for approximately half the year, and as we go further south into the Mediterranean regions of Western Australia and the more temperate regions in southeastern Australia, this decreases further. So the establishment range is potentially quite wide with some variability throughout Australia. So the next question is, will they spread to my particular area? So there are different spread pathways by which this pest can travel. Its larvae and eggs can be transported on cut flowers, but also plant material. Pupae can contaminate soil, which can then be moved throughout the landscape. And of course, you get hitchhikers, which are traveling with tourists, but also machinery. And there are natural pathways for the dispersal of this fly, which include wind-assisted transport. But by and large, overseas data is telling us that the major pathways are these human-mediated pathways, and that wind is likely to be playing a minor role in the movement of this particular pest. So again, to predict what spread is going to look like for this pest in Australia, we need to make some additional assumptions about how this pest moves throughout the landscape, how it makes larger hops between these sort of densely populated areas, and how it's driven by the environmental suitability at a particular location. As we saw in those earlier plots, different environmental suitabilities will be driving population growth at different rates. Again, we have our data inputs. So here we have population density, so human population density through space, which is assumed to play a role in the transport of leafminer. We have our climate suitability layer, which drives population growth and is dynamic throughout the year. And of course, we need some spread parameters too, which in this case, we've pulled from another small biosecurity risk, spotted wing Drosophila, which is a similarly small fly, but we have better data on the spread of this particular pest. We put all these things together, and what we get is, in terms of our output, is a prediction of spread through space. So here is a simulation going through 6 years of spread. So we can take that model and we can plonk leafminer where it has occurred in the mainland of Australia, far north Queensland in Cesar. We can run a simulation over 6 years, and we see that it hasn't really escaped the top end, which is good news. And indeed, it hasn't escaped the top end since it arrived in 2015. But what we can also do is plonk it anywhere else in the country. So if we pick, for instance, Bundaberg, we see that we get a very different picture of spread. So spread here is occurring much more rapidly. The higher human population density is driving a lot of these long distance jumps to other regions. A very different picture, which is important to remember when dealing with these pests. So once we have that spread model, we can go back to impacts, impact potential, and we can look at where the production regions for vulnerable commodities are located throughout space. We can overlay this spread model, and this allows us, using an assumption of, say, 10% crop loss, what the variability would likely be for these different incursion locations. So you can see on the right here, Bundaberg is actually predicted to be quite a severe incursion location, hypothetically, with many other incursion locations still causing significant damage through time. So what we're seeing is in the order of tens of millions of dollars after 3 years of invasion. We can also break this down into sub-industries. So here is an example for just pulling out nurseries. You can see now New South Wales is sort of comparatively of more importance, with incursion locations in Toowoomba and Sydney becoming quite high impact to the nurseries industry. But of course, there are other incursion locations which are still going to be bad news. So just because we have it in the top end and it hasn't spread very far as currently known, doesn't mean it still poses a threat to these different industries. I don't have time to go through each industry, but I do encourage you all to jump online to this web app at cesaraustralia.shinyapps.io/VLM portal, where it's an interactive page where you can explore a range of different things that I've covered in this talk, as well as some other things that I haven't covered, such as the location of and identification of weedy hosts, as well as beneficial insects. So in wrapping up, will they cause losses to my commodity? If managed poorly, the international literature suggests that exotic leaf miners can have huge impact potential on a range of different vegetable crops. In terms of can the pest establish in a particular area, it has wide establishment potential, preferring sort of more humid and warm locations, such as in the northern sort of coastal regions of Australia. But if we modify these in micro habitats through irrigation and greenhouse plants, it's expected to further expand where these pests can occur. And in terms of spread, human-mediated spread is likely to be a crucial component for the future spread of this pest. Unfortunately, why we haven't seen a huge deal of spread from its current distribution within Australia. But if there was an outbreak in a more populated area, this would likely be a completely different scenario. But all of this allows us to be a bit more targeted in our awareness, targeting these high-risk areas, and ensuring that we have proper management, awareness, as well as knowledge of the tools that are available for early detection, which will be covered in subsequent talks by Aaliyah, Peter, and Rowan. So I'll leave it at that.